Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are really excited to be here tonight with Jordan Shapiro, and soon Joe Piazza is going to be joining us too. We're working out a little technical stuff on her end, but we're here to celebrate father figure, how to be a feminist dad. This event is co-sponsored by our friends at Men Stopping Violence. Men Stopping Violence is a 39-year-old organization whose mission is to engage men and communities to take action to end violence against women. Through partnerships, listening, and experience, they build knowledge on the issue of patriarchal violence, leading critical societal conversations, and provide participants in their program with the skills they need to become change agents in their communities. Men Stopping Violence is really one of Karis's most critical partners. We are so grateful for our long institutional friendship. And when we learned about Jordan's book, there was nobody that I wanted to co-sponsor this event more with. So thanks to all of y'all for being here. Jordan, one of the things that Karis has always been a feminist bookstore, not a women's bookstore. And part of the reason for that is that we believe that feminism is for men too, and is as much for the health of men and boys as it is for women and girls. And so it is always really meaningful to me when I see books about healthy fatherhood and healthy masculinity. So I'm really excited for you to kick this off. So I'm hoping you can just share a little bit about kind of where you're coming from with this book, and maybe read a little bit of a section while I keep helping Joe get into the program.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here, hosted by Karis Books, and so grateful for the work that Men Stopping Violence does in general, but also for sponsoring this particular event. And I think while we wait for Joe to work out the technical problems, I'm going to just read a little part from part 2 of Father Figure. It's a section called "Our Father, Our King," and I'll read it for a little while. We'll see if that takes us till Joe can get here, and then I'm sure we can answer all the questions that people have about the book. And I know that Joe has a bunch of questions to ask. But here we go. I'll read this part. Sunday, 2:45 p.m. Big, heavy water droplets slam against the windows. Real thunderstorms sound much more authentic than the white noise I usually stream from the internet. I once had a student whose midterm PowerPoint presentation described himself as a pluviophile, a person who loves the rain. I don't think it's a real word. After class, thumbs pecking at my smartphone as I walked across campus, I looked it up online. There were a bunch of semi-satirical blog listicles and a few YouTube videos that used the term, but I couldn't find anything in the Oxford English Dictionary that linked pluvial, relating to rain, with philia, love, affection, or fondness. Still, I like it, both the word and the sentiment. A thunderclap of lightning never rattled me. Even as a kid, I found rain quiet, calm, and blissful. Now that I'm middle-aged, there's no better ambiance for curling up on the sofa and reading a novel. Today, I'm gripping a new book by an old friend from college. I haven't spoken to her in a few years, but we regularly admire each other's social media posts. She once created a series of travel selfies in which a plush toy elephant named Titus accompanied her on a tour of Italy, riding gondolas, eating risotto, strolling through the Villa Borghese. Her status updates make me laugh. I click the thumbs up, the heart, the smiley face. She seems to do the same for me. Unfortunately, I'm struggling to make my way through each paragraph of her novel. It feels like I've read the same sentence 19 times, the same phrases, the same words, the same jokes. It's not her fault. The prose is incisive. She's a talented author. I read everything she publishes. The problem is my younger son. He won't stop bothering me. Dad, can I ask you a question? He bursts into the room every few minutes. Can I tell you what happened in my video game? He's grabbing my arm, tugging and pulling. Do you know why the Wi-Fi is so laggy? At first, I try to reason with him. Come on, dude. Can you give me like 30 minutes to myself? I'm trying to read something. He wanders down the hallway, fingertips dirtying the paint on the wall as he turns the corner and disappears into his bedroom. I adjust the throw pillow behind my head, pull up the lamb's wool blanket so it covers my bare legs, and read about a half a page more before he's looking down at me all over again. Dad, what are we having for dinner? I lose my temper. Are you kidding me with this? I raise my voice, a long and loud diatribe about how much time and energy I give to him and his brother. I'm a martyr, damn it. Don't I deserve an occasional lazy afternoon without interruption? What have you done for this household today? Why don't you go clean your room, scrub the toilets, fold the laundry, cook dinner? When I was your age, my father made me do hard chores. My son rolls his eyes and mumbles as he walks away. Just one word: bully. Lately, he's been complaining that I scream too much, but that just makes me yell louder. It bruises my ego and threatens my authority. I'm supposed to be the one who knows best practices, especially when it comes to parenting. I want to be the arbiter of the moral high ground. I don't like when a tweenager calls out my selfish shortcomings. In these moments, my cheeks hot red, sweat beating on the back of my neck, hands quivering slightly, I think of Zeus from Greek mythology. He's often portrayed as an authoritarian. He bullies his wife Hera and their children. In one story, his son Hephaestus tries to intervene in a marital squabble, and Zeus goes nuts. He grabs the boy by the ankle and tosses him off Mount Olympus. Hephaestus falls for a whole day, eventually landing on the island of Lemnos. My son recovers from my irrational temper tantrums like Hephaestus recovers from his fall. Of course, Hephaestus is immortal, but he's not impervious to permanent wounds. His body is now disfigured. He walks with a limp, hobbling for all eternity. The story can be understood as a metaphor for the way a human father figure's minor authoritarian actions can cause long-lasting emotional damage. It tells us that the tough love lessons we try to teach our kids don't stick, they wound. That's why Hephaestus eventually takes up shop in the bowels of a volcano, forging the very thunderbolts that Zeus infamously casts in anger. It's symbolic. The son may seem content, but he lives a tragic fate. He fashions objects of unparalleled craftsmanship, the armor and provisions of gods and heroes. The artistry is so elaborate that it takes Homer 150 lines of Iliad to describe the shield of Achilles. Heavy and huge, every inch of it intricately designed, glittering like lightning. Similar to many workaholics, Hephaestus is always trying to prove his worth. His labor and dedication are perversely linked to the trauma he suffered at the hands of a rageful father. Now, I'm imagining my son, full grown, limping silently around an office building or a factory, trying to earn my approval. It breaks my heart. I put down my book and I give him my undivided attention. Some folks might think it's the wrong decision. They see the story of Hephaestus, along with other examples of Zeus's tyrannical disposition, as validation for the authority that human fathers often have over their families. They ignore that they argue that Zeus's exploits are evidence that absolute patriarchal power is an essential archetypal force that's been associated with fatherhood and masculinity since time immemorial. They see Greek mythology as proof that dad is supposed to be an uncompromising disciplinarian, but these viewpoints are wrong. For one thing, mythological precedent is a bad justification for modern behavior. More to the point, this perspective represents a biased understanding of Zeus's bullying thunderbolts. Watch out for interpretations like these, which superimpose the logic of Eurocentric monotheism onto Hellenic polytheism. You can't just appropriate the ancient artifacts of one religious system to validate the patriarchal inclinations of another. Zeus and his thunderbolts are not evidence that masculine patriarchal dominance is a legitimate and natural part of the human experience. The Greek pantheon does not exemplify that kind of singular monarchy. Zeus posits himself above all others, for the archetypal idea of oneness presents itself as first, superior, progenitor, wrote the American archetypal psychologist James Hillman. But Zeus is just one among other equals. Each of the Olympian immortals has their own special sovereignty. Each has their own goal, their own energetic tone, their own realm of power. Zeus is the deity who sometimes displays an inclination towards tyrannical force. He sees himself as the autocratic ruler of the gods, but the ancient humans who wrote the stories didn't see him that way. In their texts, there's no competition to climb the ladder of the Olympian corporate structure. No other gods challenge Zeus's rule, yet nothing terrifies him more than murderous ascendancy. That's why he's always defending his status. In this way, he's like the stereotypical entry-level Wall Street banker, sporting a too shiny tailored suit and a bright grenadine silk tie, boasting about alpha male achievements that the rest of us find unimpressive. Similarly, the other Olympians are uninterested in Zeus's dominion. They're too focused on alternative kinds of power. They know that executive will does not always reign supreme. In fact, there are many myths in which Zeus's narcissistic love of autocratic force becomes his fatal flaw. He's sometimes outwitted by Athena or seduced by Aphrodite. That's because Zeus is not a model from which humans should deduce the criteria for good behavior. The ancient Greeks didn't have bumper stickers that said, "What would Zeus do?" No, he's a cautionary figure, a symbol that warns us how dangerous it can be to rely exclusively on the power that comes from hurling thunderbolts. It's not that thunderbolts don't have their place. After all, to a pluviophile, they're blissful and calm. The popular Vietnamese Tibetan Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh evokes them while teaching about the power of quiet, compassionate listening. He writes, "There are times when silence is truth, and that is called thundering silence." Clearly, there are both positive and negative qualities associated with thunderbolts. To be a feminist dad, you need to identify the good stuff and be wary of the bad. From a mythopoetic perspective, thunderbolts can represent our capacity to make singular and pointed decisions. Zeus's thunderbolts can be a metaphor for strong, clear, and determined action. He is a leader, an executive who can target problems and solve them quickly. Please don't jump to the conclusion that these positive traits are innate characteristics of fatherhood or masculinity. The ancient Greeks saw Zeus-like attributes as a universal choice, sometimes necessary and unavoidable, but not an innate predisposition unique to certain categories of people. Sure, Zeus favored some heroes, but more often than not, his favor brought tragedy. Remember, the ancient Greeks had many gods, and too much attention given to or received from any one of those immortals was considered problematic. It was like a curse. In modern times, archetypal psychologists frame this problem as the ego fallacy. It's what happens when we over-identify with a single mythological figure. Understand that in classical Jungian thought, each character in a myth represents a specific cognitive outlook or emotional temperament. The stories describe how different psychological energies or complexes interact with one another. Like the colorful sprites in Disney Pixar's 2015 animated feature Inside Out, the characters in myth are personifications of internal drives, moods, complexes, and mental dispositions. Therefore, one of the messages you can infer from interpreting most ancient Greek myths in this way is that too much or too little from any single voice is problematic. Psychological well-being requires that inner forces cooperate, that they make decisions by consensus, that they're equally represented. The ego fallacy is what happens when one inner voice becomes dominant, when it defines an individual's identity. Not only does this identification egoize one of the figures in a myth, writes NYU professor and Jungian analyst Michael Vanoy Adams, it also tends to normalize that figure and pathologize the others. What he means is that it makes us believe that one set of attitudes and behaviors is right and proper, while all possible deviations from it are wrong and improper. Consider this lesson in the context of father figures. It tells us that an important part of becoming a feminist dad is learning to avoid the ego fallacy. Be cautious not to over-identify with certain expressions of the familiar dad persona. Don't aspire to a singular, comprehensive, absolute, and immutable image of the father figure. That's the very definition of ego fallacy autocracy. Masculine patriarchal authority, garrisoned with domination, violence, and thunderbolts, is not something universal and innate, and all potential alternatives to it are not pathological. That is the fallacy folks are trying to uphold each time they say a child needs a strong masculine influence in their lives. They want us to believe that healthy development depends on toxic paternal force, that anything unorthodox will hurt our children. A feminist dad knows that this is not true. You can and should make different choices. Recognize that you can be a leader, a boss, and even a disciplinarian some of the time, but you shouldn't be any of those things all the time. Evaluate the specific situations in which you find yourself, analyze the context, and call on the deity, disposition, or inner voice most appropriate for the job at hand. In other words, be responsive. I see you're there, Joe.
I'm here. Yay! And I'm wearing my most feminist muumuu right now.
Nice. Me too.
I don't know. I could say, I need you to send me some of those t-shirts. My husband needs to be sporting one of those around Philadelphia.
Yeah, you got it. I got plenty. I also have aprons.
Oh, yes, I want both of those things. Amazing. But that's what I want to give him for Father's Day. So let's get it over here immediately.
All right.
I'm so sorry that Mercury is in retrograde and it took me 1,000 hours to get in. But I restarted 2 computers and downloaded the app on my phone to make this work.
All right. I appreciate it. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
We did it. But, all right. So my opening question, and I'm glad that you read that section, because what I want to start out with is, I think this book should be required reading for every man who may create a human or may not create a human. Like, I wish this could be given out, like, when, so I don't even want to say when a guy accompanies his wife to the first doctor's appointment, because the men that need to read it aren't going with their wives to the first doctor's appointment. But like, maybe in the delivery room, like, enough of them are in the delivery room that it's like, okay, out pops that slippery white baby, like covered in that white goo, and here's a copy of your book. Right? Like that gooey baby, and read this book. And the book will get disgusting, but that's okay. So, but my question is, how do we get this book into the hands and get these thoughts into the brains of the people that need it the most? Because I gave a copy to my husband, who is already a feminist dad. I mean, he grew up reading every Judy Blume book that there is. And he still needs help, right? But like, he's already there. And I feel like the men that are picking this up are already there. So how can we get this information to the men that so sorely need this if our world is ever going to be a better place?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and of course, it's a question that I sit with all the time, because when you write a book like this, you go, wait, how are you going to get the, it's sort of like, how do you write a book telling who's going to pick up a book telling them that they need to change for real, right? Like, we like the books that tell us we just have to do yoga. That's the kind of change books we like. The ones that tell us we're allowed to meditate and relax, and not the ones that ask for the real pain. Yeah. What I would say, and what I'd like to emphasize is, to some extent, I think it is going to take women to buy the book for men, and I think that's okay, because actually, when we were picking the subtitle and the cover for the book, some of the statistics they showed me were that most books are bought by women anyway, even the books that are read by men. So, it's just another one of those. They're already buying the James Patterson books, so they might as well buy one more for their husbands. And but what I want to say is, I think that might, that probably turns a few people off. Because I think that word feminist, which I've intentionally put so big on my shirt and so big on the cover of the book, is really feels alienating to people, feels like an attack to a lot of people. And what I want to say is that if there's one thing that I did very intentionally in this book, and a lot of people have commented on it, is that it's not really a judgmental book. It's not.
It's not at all. No, I mean, it's so much of it. I read it when you first sent it over, and then I reread parts of it last night. So much of it is just your own experience, which I don't think we see enough of, because we don't see real dads talk about what it's like to be a real dad, which is going to bring me, into my next question, because I totally agree with you. I think that the word feminist can be very alienating to a lot of men. But I also—
And even some women.
It's true. I mean, I love this one line that you have in the book that, all images of fatherhood that we still see today reinforce industrial age attitudes about gender and sex. And as a person who's very involved in the media, I make podcasts, I work with, TV and movie production studios. Pop culture still portrays dads in one way, and it is not as a feminist dad. And so so what I want to do is mail this book to every screenwriter and TV writer that I know in Hollywood, because I think do you think we have to see media change how they portray fathers?
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that I really do, I think, hammer home in the early part of father figure is just the degree to which we let the Joseph Campbell hero's journey shape our entire thinking about not just male psychology, which is all he was talking about when he wrote it, but everyone.
Man. Yeah.
Right. And so absolutely. And people keep asking me, are there good images of fathers and on TV? And the truth is, there really aren't. There's lots of caring, compassionate dads on TV, but as I was writing this book, and now as I'm talking about the book all the time and watching TV myself, the amount of times where I go, oh, there's the good bad dad, the bad good dad again. The dad who seems so ethical and puts his family first and puts his children first every time, but also lies to them because he thinks it's his job to control how he puts them first. Or after I wrote section 3 of this book, which is all about daddy-daughter relationships and the weird, strange eroticism that's sort of baked into it.
Weird. Yes.
It's in every TV show I watch. It's right. It's like every time you see a dad talk to his daughter on TV, it's got these weird sexual, I was going to say undertones, but there might be overtones. And we've taken this for granted, this idea that dads are supposed to be like the prototypical boyfriend. So that means that's already an inherently unequal relationship, right? Like I'm all for the idea that you want to find people who love you as much as your dad loves you, but the idea that we then add eroticism on top of that is just creepy and weird. Yeah.
You know what it made me think of? So I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, which had creepy sexual norms about it anyway. But
I can't imagine.
We had the father-daughter formal dance every year, where like we got all dressed up since freshman year as if we were going to the freaking prom, like the fancy. And he got us a carnation, and then we went and like we did all the dancing. Like part of that is adorable, but part of that is also like, why couldn't we just have like parent-kid dance? Why does it have to be like your dad is taking you on a date to this formal dance? In hindsight, it's super gross.
It's really gross, and it's really problematic. And one of the things that I did when I wrote Father Figure, and for those, you've already read it, but for people who haven't read it, when they get to that section, is I lay out the history of how that came to be, and you realize this is not like an old thing. This is very much it started around the 1940s, I think, if I remember the dates right. I'm terrible at dates, but I think it's 1940s, and it is this weird sort of rehash of Freudian Oedipal constructs that everyone bought into, and it gets even more. I mean, there's stuff where I kind of kept it tame in the book because I did, I wanted to talk, as you said, to dads who were trying to do the right thing. I didn't want them to be able to dismiss it and go, well, I never did anything abusive, so therefore this part's not for me. Right. There are tons of stories about doctors in the middle of the 20th century thinking that a consummated relationship between a father and his daughter, a consummated sexual relationship, was better than no relationship, that you were more likely to get screwed up if you had no relationship than if you had sex with, like, it's so weird.
Weird.
And then we allow that to make, like, it still shapes our thinking about, you see it all the time. I mean, all over Amazon, there's books about how dads need to be the first boyfriend for their daughter. Yeah. I mean, it's a crazy thing. And I remember finding it in the research, and it took me forever to write that chapter because it was really intense, and I was like, how do you tell this story?
What can I say? That's not like the ickiest thing possible. That's going to make me
and I couldn't believe how few people talk about it. I mean, there's a great historian, Rachel Devlin, whose work is at the core of that chapter, who I've gotten to know since, and she's fantastic. But even she said when she first started to write about it, like, everyone was like, not reading that book. I don't want to acknowledge any of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's so interesting too, because we're not at a place in academia where we publish things that are critical of how men are men in the world. And I think that is, and I'm not even saying I'm not saying critical as in like attacking, but saying, can we look at this through the lens of, has this been working, and how does this work, and how can we possibly shift things? Because obviously something in the world isn't working.
I think that's right.
There are things that are very fucking broken. And I think that a lot of that has to do with how men have been perceived and taught to be men in the world. And I feel genuinely sorry for you guys. Because I'm like, you don't, like, there's just not a template for how to be a good man, except now your book. I think it's tough. My husband, when he became a dad, really felt like he had no one to guide him at all. Like, like you say this in the book, but every book on parenting we read had the mom doing almost everything. with the pregnancy sections, it was like, dads, you can maybe get groceries or rub her feet. And like even the potty training books addressed the mothers and not the fathers.
And the ones that are written for the fathers are just like full of weird, like military and sports metaphors.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to conquer that diaper.
Yeah, exactly. Which is not my husband at all. Like my husband is like not a sports guy. Like not, and he's just like this isn't for me. That's not for me. There's nothing for me out here. Which I think is interesting. I also rewatched 3 Men and a Baby 2 weeks ago.
I haven't rewatched it.
You should rewatch it. You should rewatch just because Tom Selleck is so handsome, and Steve Guttenberg. But for me, it kind of, because I was watching it while I was reading your book, and it epitomized everything that Hollywood does wrong when it talks about fatherhood.
Yeah.
And then it got a sequel.
Well, I even remember watching it as a kid and like loving it as a kid, but I think you're right. I mean, again, I haven't watched it recently enough, but I am sure. I mean, everything they show is wrong, and everything they show is this weird. I shouldn't even say it's weird. I mean, it's built into everything that men learn about what it means to be so-called masculine, which is this idea that you can figure everything out yourself. Right. This idea that you don't need any guidance, this idea that you need to be fiercely independent, right? This idea that we have seen play out in politics of I don't need to hear from any experts because I have everything within me, right? I see this from the teenagers in my house, right? And it's fine. I'm not saying it's fine from the teenagers, but it's to be expected from teenagers. This sense of I figured everything out. But what happens is that gets built. That's why teen boys don't do well in school, for example, right? Because they think they're not supposed to. It's not cool to have to learn, right? It's not macho to have to learn, and I think that's built into why there aren't any fatherhood books, really, and why there's not enough of this. Because men feel like they're, it's the same as not asking for directions, the old stereotype, right? They're just supposed to know how to do it. They're supposed to be the authority on how to do it. And that's how they imagine themselves. Of course, the pain point here, which got me to writing the book in the first place, is that every man I have ever met feels like they're failing at it in every way of their lives, right? In almost every part of their lives, they're going, I'm supposed to be perfect. I'm supposed to be powerful. I'm supposed to be the so-called alpha. And I don't feel that way ever. Right. So what happens is men walk around with this deep sense of shame and humiliation that they then compensate for by being domineering, by being
an asshole.
But I wasn't going to say it because I'm trying to be non-judgmental. But I'm sometimes an asshole. Lots of men, we're all sometimes assholes, and often when we are, it's because we're compensating for the places where we feel weak, where we feel inferior. And one of the inherent problems with the way we've designed and constructed masculinity in our current culture is that that men are living with that all day long. And by the way, it's it's even the ones at the top. If you just think about our 4 years with Donald Trump, anytime anyone said anything to him, he was like, "Oh my God, don't insult me! You're so mean!"
How
right?
dare you? This is fake news. Yeah.
Right. It's like even when you do have all the power, you still feel like you have to compensate for what power you don't. And that's this cycle of shame is built into it, and that's what needs to break. And so what happens is, even when we see the good dads on TV, they're just keeping that whole model of masculinity propped up in a way that is. That creates a kind of, I don't know what to call it, a kind of internal toxicity for all men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was saying to my husband the other day, I forget what we were talking about, but I'm like, we have no language in our culture to address male fragility. And like you said, male insecurities and, men feeling that they're failing all the time. And because we have, I know what we're talking about, because we have no way to address that, then we see, men go off and get an AK-47 and, propagate a mass shooting. Because we have no way for men to talk about, hey, I'm feeling like shit about myself. How can I change this?
And I would just say, what I want to add to that is, because you said we have no man. I just want to make one slight, tiny, nuanced addition to what you said, because you said there's no way for men to talk about that. Actually, that always has sort of bothered me, because men are allowed to talk about whatever they want. We live in a patriarchal culture, and often what that turns out to be is what a lot of the men's books are, which I like to call "hold my balls while I cry" masculinity, which is I'm so sad that I can't talk about my feelings.
I don't know
it's
why.
not just
I don't know why you didn't title this book "Hold My Balls While I Cry."
right. Well, hold my right. That's what a lot of them are, and it is this model of I'm so sad that I'm not allowed to be vulnerable. But what's underneath that, it's not that men aren't allowed to be vulnerable. It's actually that we do not value emotions and vulnerability. It's not, we don't value it in women either, right? Like it's not like, oh, women are allowed to and men aren't. It's that we think women are weak because they do, and we think men who do are weak. So this notion that we need to do it, what we really need is for men to be allowed within themselves, to be vulnerable to themselves, to be able to sit with self-doubt, to be able to sit with uncertainty themselves. This is not about, there's lots of structural social things also, but at the key point here is this, what we just said, you got to not be afraid to ask for directions.
Yeah. Or to ask for lots of things, right?
Right.
Yes. Generally just to ask for help.
To ask for help and to ask for help. The problem is you have to identify your own weakness, and identifying your own weakness is really hard. I mean, I can tell you I spent 2 years researching and writing this book, and it might have been the hardest 2 years of my life. I mean, they were from a sort of, material standpoint, they were fine. I was, I have a privileged life. I can eat, I get paid, right? That's fine. But from an emotional standpoint, the amount of work that I had to do, the amount of owning up to my own failures, was really, really, painful at first, but liberating in the end. I think in the end, what you get from that is what's at the core of all of the masculinity books that I would love to pick on. But why they work is that they tell you a very good, they have this small good message about confidence, about presence, about autonomy, about knowing what you care about and being willing to bring that and manifest that in the world. The problem is they don't have the right answer for how to get there. And as painful as the self-work was to do this book, in the end, I think I did find what that promise of confidence and autonomy and an understanding of, who I am and how I want to move through the world and how I want to ask questions, and when I feel comfortable being wrong and when I don't, and being able to ask all those really hard questions that are not just questions of reinventing masculinity, which is what everyone says, although they are to some extent, but also a necessary thing in the way our world is moving. Like those old Stoic versions of masculinity, they might have made sense for a world where jobs were manufacturing jobs and jobs were physical labor jobs, but America's an information communication economy now, and we have not taught our men to communicate. In fact, we've done the opposite.
You refer to yourself in the book as a father figure in progress, which I would like that to be on a T-shirt too. I think that or a bumper sticker, maybe. A beer koozie. But I'm a big fan of beer koozies. I'd like to really bring them back. And that kind of harkens to what you just said, which is over the course of 2 years, you saw yourself change. What were the changes that you saw in yourself from Jordan Shapiro, who pitched this book, to Jordan Shapiro, who dug in and did the research for this book?
That's a great question. Well, I'll tell you first that when I pitched this book, I thought I was going to do a kind of Jungian archetypal study of fatherhood and talk about what is essential fatherhood and find out what that was. And the problem was that there wasn't anything that really held up under scrutiny. There wasn't a good argument throughout time for gendered parenting roles at all, at least not in the way that we imagine them. And we have lots of examples from different societies and different times. And, the whole myth that, women always cared for the babies and men always were out working is absurd. I mean, that's just for anyone listening, I'll just say very quickly, right? Like for most of human history, everybody worked. Okay. There's only one moment in all of human history where people were rich enough for it to be a single breadwinner household. And it was white families in America in the 1950s. And that was the only community that is in all of history, maybe some monarchs, I'm sure plenty of monarchs, aristocrats, but that's the only time.
Also mostly white families.
It was all white families at that time.
All white families living in castles.
Right, exactly. So that is just an absurd. That's sort of an absurd notion of gendered family roles that we've bought into and believe is universal and historic when it's not. So once you do that, you have this problem of is there anything that's universal? And really, I couldn't find anything that was universal. So then it became a question of, okay, so then what does it mean to imagine what kind of dad models the best behaviors and does the best work at raising good adults for this current cultural context, right? So there's not even a moral. I mean, I might personally have a moral judgment. I mean, I absolutely personally have moral judgments, right? And ethical judgments about one version versus the other. But in the book, I don't think there really is one. In the book, what I'm saying is we live at a time where that requires us to make certain changes in order for our communities to work. And that's all I'm saying, right? Judge for yourself what you think's good and bad within that. So that meant a lot of looking at myself, and that meant a lot of acknowledging the places where I don't live up to, where I betray my own rhetoric, right? Noticing the moments where I still have, where I'm playing ping pong with my kids sometimes, and I'm like trying to destroy them because I want to be the dominant male in the household, and I have to go, why am I doing this? Why am I this makes no sense, right? There's no, I'm just in this pattern that for some odd reason. And so identifying all those patterns, I think it really has changed me and allowed me to drop so many things that weren't fun anyway, right? Because I just got frustrated when I was trying to do that. I couldn't be in the moment and have fun. So, maybe the whole point is I'm having more fun now. I'll make that as a sales pitch, right?
Yeah.
This book will make you have more fun.
This book will make being a dad so fucking fun. Go out and get it.
Well, it's true in some ways, though. It allows me to enjoy it instead of trying to live into the expectations of what I think a father is supposed to be, because it's what I saw on TV, because it's what I saw in the movies, because it's what I see on billboards and magazines and and everything else. And even again, so many of these masculinity books, the Hold My Balls While I Cry masculinity books, right? They haven't actually changed the narrative.
No.
And it's sad. So in that sense, I think men are, in some ways, I don't want to say that men are victims, because that's absurd. But there is a portion of this book, Father Figure, that is about how hard it is to be a man within patriarchy, and what it feels like, and why it's difficult, and how we need to change it so that we don't force another generation of everyone, not just our sons, a lot of people think this is a book about how to raise daughters, not about that, but it's all about this.
Yeah. No, and I hear you. I think it's very hard, especially for you as a man, to say, I never want to say men are victims, because we know the conversation in the world, right? But like I said at the start of this chat, I do feel sorry for men. And I've told my husband many, many times that I feel sorry for him, because like I said, I just don't think that he has a great dad, but he has a dad who's 90 years old, very stoic, was the breadwinner for the family, a very classic classic, model. And he's also a great dad, but like, I don't think that he sees other ways to be. And I think that's the conversation that I enjoy so much in your book. And what I would love, because we do know that women tend to buy books more. The same way, I think one of my friends has a shampoo company, and he found this statistic that women buy all of the men's shampoos. So he should just be marketing to the women to get it to buy it for their husbands. And so I do think that women should buy this book for their husbands. But what I would love is if couples could read it together. I was just listening to, I did an Instagram Live with Marlo Thomas yesterday about her podcast with Phil Donahue. And they interviewed Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, who read to each other every night. Like to something different. They're both in their 90s. They pick a book or the Bible and they read it to each other and then they talk about it. And with my old book, How to Be Married, a lot of couples told me they read it to each other out loud because it gave them a new way to communicate because they saw it on the page. So I would love for couples to get this book and maybe read parts of it together, because I also think that for a woman, like the different perspective of a mother to be like, hey, do you see what he's doing on this page? You do that too. I think could be really great. So that's what I want to encourage wives to do for Father's Day. Buy this book for your husband. Also, maybe buy some whiskey, not to propagate old gender norms. But I like to drink whiskey, and I would like to drink some whiskey while reading this book and read it together.
By the way, that's not a true old gender norm. Most whiskey, both here and in Scotland and in Ireland, the industry is started by women because it started out as distilling alcohol for tinctures and for medicine, and then they turned it into booze. Absolutely, but there's all these stories. I've been recently reading a lot about this. Like, it's either Jim Beam or Jack Daniels. One of them actually is was completely scaled from a tiny little like mountain distillery to its current form by a woman. But still have this image of whiskey as like a man's drink.
It'll put hair on your balls while I hold them for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's actually a really great comment over here in the comment section from Greg that says it seems like accountability, and in this case, honest self-reflection is what preceded the change for you, which I do think is, I think that is available for men as they read a book like this, because I feel like they'll be able to they'll see themselves in you. Because the great thing about this book is that it's not just didactic. You're not just talking at people with facts and figures, but like you do share like such beautiful parts of your own story and your own growth as a father and a father figure that I think a lot of men will see themselves in you in a really beautiful way.
Well, I hope that's true. I mean, it's really. Yeah, I mean that's really the goal, and just to say, when you said it's not didactic, I'll also say, I didn't write the book with this idea that I was going to give a sort of cookie cutter model or any real model of what it necessarily means to be a feminist dad. Like, you're not going to read it and be like, here, I just have to try these 6 things, right? Right, there's no checklist. Instead, I tried to offer tools. Offer tools that allowed men to look at themselves, to ask the questions, to do what Greg wrote in the comments here, to do the honest self-reflection, and then to make their own decisions. I don't tell you what you're supposed to end up with as the answer. I tell you what I ended up with the answer, but I don't. But the goal is not to say, hey, I know how to do this in the right way for every person or every family or every child. But I do know that if you're not willing to do that self-reflection, if you're not willing to let go of some of that authority, of some of that old school patriarchal masculinity, you're not doing what's in the best interest of yourself, of your partner, and probably and not in your kid. And I was going to say probably not in the best interest of your kids, but I'm pretty certain it's not in the best interest of your kids. Having written about education and child development for many years, I can see the degree to which so many of the things that are obstacles for us doing what the science tells us works is often patriarchal norms.
Like what? What are some of those things?
Well, so many of the things when you hear about, so one of the things that's real trendy right now in education and child development and all, is more play, right? More learning through play, right? And often we're against that learning through play because we have this old model of the stoic father who's supposed to, as I say in the book, mimic the real world's apathy. So we have to give that tough love. We have to interrupt the idleness. We have to interrupt what, many of that nurturing care that's often associated with femininity, putting it in air quotes, right? Right. That is supposed to be interrupted by dad, right? And so the dads go through almost like we've been trained to memorize the script where we go, why is it so noisy in here? You need to quiet down. We have so many of these, even Bruce Springsteen talks about his dad like banging, what's that racket up there while he's playing the guitar, right? Like that's in this sort of myth of what it means to go through the American journey of growth is to have your fun interrupted by your dad. Right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. I'm wondering, we've been on for about 40 minutes. Should we ask for questions?
Absolutely.
Does everyone know
I don't know how we ask for questions. I think they're supposed to show up in the chat or maybe, let's see.
Oh, there. All right. In the ask a question box. I mean, I have 1,000 more questions for you, so I can keep going. And then when it pops up, I'll mention it.
All right.
One of them is that, so I knew your wonderful wife before I knew you, because we are in the same lady networking group. What was her response when you said, I'm going to write a book about how to be a feminist dad?
What was Amanda's? I mean, Amanda and I have been talking for many years about how much I wanted to write a book that was a feminist book for men. This has been a long dream of mine. I had no idea it was going to be a book about fatherhood. That was a sort of happy accident that came. But for a long time, I've wanted to say, what does it mean to interact differently with your partner and your family in ways that integrate the wisdom of feminist theory, queer theory, and critical race theory, which I don't say enough in the book because I didn't know we were going to have a whole controversy about it then, but I would have put it in more because they all come from the same thing, which is, it used to be just called critical theory, and then they added gender theory, critical gender theory, critical race theory. But all these things are full of all this wisdom of being able to look at the structures in which we participate, the way that they oppress everyone, not just one group or another, right? And so how do you integrate those into your being as you interact with a spouse, for example, right? So that's an ongoing practice that happens between Amanda and myself all the time, conversations where these things come up, usually after it's been a screaming fight, right? I don't want to make it sound like we're saints, right? Like we start off angry at each other, really, but then eventually we turn that into
a decent place.
Right. Then we learn how to have that conversation about how do we think about this outside of questions of how our genitals are supposed to organize our family roles, right? Because almost, I mean, I don't know if I could say almost all. I don't have a statistical way to figure this out. It'd be interesting if I tried to record it for like a week, just like every conflict, and see how many of them are just like us being confused about why the old rules about genitals and family aren't holding up. Because I think that's so many marital fights. It's like I thought you were going to do the laundry.
I'm going to throw it out there, even though I don't know because I haven't done a test. Like, I think it's the majority of my marital fights are based on antiquated gender roles and expectations.
That's what I'm guessing. That's what I'm guessing. Yeah. And so I think to some extent, I think Amanda and I have a super happy relationship, and so I think she was very happy that I was going to write it because she thought maybe some people will learn how to have the kinds of conversations that we have, because I think we all meet people all the time who you hear the kinds of arguments you have, you hear the kinds of parenting struggles they have, and sometimes from the outside you can hear very clearly how simple the problem is, but we can't always say that. One of the great things about being a writer is you can say the things that you can't necessarily say to your friends at the dinner table, but you can still write it to them. They never know.
Right,
Sometimes
exactly.
they might
until they do because I've done that too, and then like years later they're listening to the audiobook and they're like, you they're like, you were talking directly to me, how dare you.
They should say thank you.
They should say thank you. They should have. Oh, hold on! I almost lost you. I hit a button on my computer to try to raise the volume, and you disappeared. But you're back now. You don't give like a list of how to be a feminist dad in here, which I really appreciate. Oh, the other thing I want to point out in this is that you have the longest notes section of any book that I've read in a really long time. Like, this is the most research intensive book that I've read since college, maybe. So
well, it was really important to me. I knew that writing a book as a man about feminism was opening me up to a lot of accusations of appropriation, I mean, I don't need to explain them all. And so I really needed to make sure that I was able to cite my arguments in a really strong way in this book. And so I cared a lot about that. Although I just saw a review today of it that suggested the research was bad. But what's interesting about that review is if you read as you'll remember, the first page of Father Figure talks about a bad review I received in my previous book. That reviewer somehow got someone to let them write a review of this book also without the publication acknowledging that there might be a conflict of interest. If you're criticized on page 1 of the book, I think there's a journalistic ethics problem with you reviewing it.
Just a little bit. I'm gonna go look that up. I'm not gonna dig anymore, but I'm gonna look that up. But yes, oh my god. Have you heard from any people who do say you're a man, you shouldn't be using the word feminist, you shouldn't be talking about feminism, how dare you?
Wait, you froze for a second, so I missed the question.
Am I back? Can you see me now?
Yeah, you're back. Yeah.
Have you gotten any shit from people saying you're a man, how dare you use the word feminism?
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. A little bit from women, a little bit. There's certainly a community of people who believe that you should leave the feminism to the femmes, and I get that. I mean, I think there is some validity, at least maybe not to the idea that we leave the feminism to the femmes, because I don't think feminism is really about that. But I do think there's some validity to the worry that to think that a man writing a book and frankly making money off a book about feminism, right? Like there's something a little bit problematic there, but the message needs to get out, and the message needs to get out. There's been studies that show that men are more likely to listen to it from other men, and even though there is an admittedly problematic angle here. To me, that's a sort of cost-benefit analysis that I had to weigh to do the work that I had to do. But it's hard. It's hard, and it's always been hard for me from the beginning of writing this. Is that question of what does it mean to be a man writing a book about feminism? I mean, of course, there's also there's some of the insults I get, the insults from men, which of course the way that men insult other men is always to feminize them, right? Right. So even a lot of the homophobic insults are sort of grounded in this idea of a very binary look at gender. So that if you're not straight man, you must be woman, right? And woman is automatically bad and weak and horrible, right? So that's sort of built into what I've gotten from a lot of men who just immediately they'll call me things like mangina. They'll say things like,
Do you get a lot of mangina?
I've gotten some mangina. I've gotten like, you know, do you even have a dick? You know, stupid, all that stupid stuff. But then also, you know, there's been a lot of you know, there's women also who hear the word feminist as somehow me arguing that like I'm looking to be feminine, like I want to feminize men, right? It's back in that same sort of binary you know, locker room masculinity, like I'm going to call you a little girl, I'm going to call you a little sissy, and that's some that you know, in both cases they're all based on this same idea. We need this cis hetero binary in which men are strong and everyone else is weak. And all I'm saying is like that's nonsense. I mean, I'm not trying. You know, I still do half the things that we associate with masculinity. I barbecue and I drink whiskey, and right, I know how to work power tools. Like I'm not trying to sit here,
Jordan.
I'm just trying to get rid of the dominance and the violence and the misogyny. I'm not trying to get rid of I'm not trying to be like, no, you can't have a beer koozie.
Right. Like that again, another good tagline for your book. I'm not trying to get rid of your barbecue. I just want to end the violence.
Right, exactly.
Eat your fucking barbecue, guys. All right, we've got a question over here. Jordan, you mentioned several examples of bad books geared towards men and dad. Were there any books that you loved that were actually helpful?
Oh. It's a hard question. No, I mean, there's plenty of books I have read in my life that were actually helpful, but I don't think that there are any particular, you know, any really good, I mean, outside of academia, I should say. There are no real mainstream books that I think about masculinity that are but that or men, I should say. Yeah, let me shift it, because there are a few recently, right? Michael Ian Black wrote a very good book that called A Better Man. And
I really enjoyed that book.
That was good. Yeah, Liz Plank wrote a very good book about how men can rethink. And so I didn't think of those at first because those were books I read. You know, I had already decided to write this. You know, it was and so I heard the question as in my entire life of like my own self-help journey, was I ever able to find any that were good? And no, I mean, Robert Bly, really problematic. David Dida, really problematic. You know, I was already starting this book when the horrible Jordan Peterson book came out, but I did read it, but I guess what I'll say I have no desire to defend Jordan Peterson, but I will say that I think one of the reasons that book is so popular is because it does a very good job in the first half of the argument of articulating the struggle that men and boys are feeling at this moment in time. The problem in that book is the solution, not the articulation of the problem. And almost all the books do a good job of articulating the hard thing about what it is to be a man. There are very few, except for a few that have come out. Oh, you know, another great one is Jared Yates Sexton has a book called The Man They Wanted Me to Be. That's a fascinating book. He's from, is it Arkansas? I can't remember where. You know, he's basically rural Republican conservative family, and trying to make sense of masculinity within that family. And he wrote a really fantastic book about that also. But again, all of these were books that came out in the last few years while I was working, and I'm glad that there's a lot starting to pop up. But a lot of the old, you know, there's not much in the old model. Bell Hooks, The Will of Change, someone wrote, which of course is true. Sure, Bell Hooks is fantastic. I mean, there's a ton of things by Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks I quote constantly. Bell Hooks is one of my heroes. So yeah, The Will to Change is good, and in all of her books there is always good thoughts about masculinity and men. Oh, and look, a link to Jared's book is right there. Yeah, right. Good.
I stumbled across the best coffee table book ever when I was researching my book, How to Be Married. I was over in Sweden talking to Swedish couples about equality in marriage and in parenting, where, you know, they have a much more egalitarian society when it comes to parenting. And I interviewed this one photographer who did a book called Swedish Dads, and it's just beautiful pictures of like dads doing housework and cooking and like while they're carrying their children. And it was just really, I bought it for so many. That's been my baby shower present for a lot of men. Because it should just be on your coffee table for everyone to see as you come in and serve them whiskey.
Yeah. Swedish men are very pretty.
They're that's the other thing. Like, you're just so good looking that, like, you know, men, women, everyone just wants to look at them vacuuming a house. It's like
they also have like different colors than we have somehow. Like,
they all look like they have an Instagram filter on them all the time.
I meant like their clothing, like their clothing, like they have blues that I don't ever see here. They're like, they have like blue suits.
Well, I thought you meant it just looks like the light of God was shining on them. It's just like, they're like, oh. Do we have any more questions, guys? I know we're creeping up on an hour now because I had so many things to ask Jordan, and I was also so terribly late. That might be it. Might be time for us to wrap it up. But like I am telling everyone I know to get this for Father's Day.
Oh, I'll hold it up too. That's a good idea.
Right? I'm gonna hold it up, and I'm gonna hold it up and I'm gonna take a picture of my screen so I can put it on my Instagram. So
all right.
Shameless.
We're both supposed to hold it at the same time?
Yeah, we're both holding it at the same time.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, but before we sign off, now you have a new book coming out. You should at least say what that's all about.
I do. Well, now because we promote books, 6 months in advance. I have a novel coming out in October. I actually have that here too because I'm in my office and I have everything with me. Called We're Not Like Them, and comes out in October. And I co-wrote it with my editor, Christine Pride at Simon & Schuster. And it's told from a point, and Christine is a Black woman who worked in the very white world of publishing, and still does for a very long time. And when we worked together on my last novel, she was like, I really want to do a commercial women's fiction book, commercial fiction, told from the perspective of a white woman and a Black woman about their interracial friendship. And so we did, and we created this book, which just, what we were saying before, it's like, how do you get a book in someone's hands that needs to read it? So in this book, we have these hard conversations about race, because race is hard to talk about, if we're all being honest about that, but it's fiction. And so we think that we can get a book into people's hands that is fiction that will enjoy the beautiful story of these women's friendships, but come away with language to have these hard conversations about race.
Well, I'm excited for it. I can't wait to read it, and maybe we can come back to Karis Books and we'll flip it so that I'll interview the two of you.
You'll get both Christine and I at the same time, so you'll just be like flanked by like powerful women.
I'm all for that. That's awesome.
Well, I just want to thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation, and thanks to Men Stopping Violence for always being an incredible partner for us. So I dropped the link to Joe's book in the chat. It really does help us when you pre-order books, even if it seems really weird to order a book like 6 months in advance. It helps her as an author. It helps us as a bookstore. And you can click this teal button at the bottom center of your screen to buy Father Figure directly from Karis. The more you can support the authors who actually come and spend their time with us on these virtual events, the better authors we can host. So it really does mean a lot, and we're very grateful to the publishers for sending folks to us, and to both of you for spending time with us tonight and for fighting the good fight to get this technology to work.
We did it.
That's the good fight we're fighting, not the one against patriarchy.
We're fighting a lot of good fights here. It's a lot.
How many? Look, you gotta fight on all
fronts,
right?
All fronts.
Yeah,
but not in like a really domineering, toxic way.
No. A very gentle fight. But this was really lovely. Thank you both so much. I will be adding captions to this and putting it up on YouTube in a couple days, so I'll tweet that link out as well. And we'd love for y'all to share that so that more folks can find this and find out more about Karis. But we look forward, hopefully, to hosting you both again in the future. And I hope until then, y'all stay safe and well.
All right.
You
Thanks
too.
so much for
Thank
having
you
us.
so
Bye,
much.
guys.